If you're enjoying this video, smash that like button, subscribe, and hit the bell. Share it with your friends and let me know in the comments where you're watching from. Every like and subscribe helps the channel grow. The cold hit my face like tiny needles as I paddled across Snowbank Lake. Something was wrong, dead wrong. The woods were too quiet, like they were holding their breath, waiting for something terrible to happen. My name is Marianne Foster. I'm a park ranger in the Boundary Waters, and I've seen just about everything these woods can throw at a person. At least that's what I thought until today. I dipped my paddle into the glass-like water, sending ripples across the perfect reflection of pine trees. The sun was already sinking, painting long shadows across the snow. In a few hours, it would be dark, and in these parts, winter darkness is something to fear. The first snowflakes started falling, big, fat ones that landed on my eyelashes. I blinked them away and looked toward shore. That's when I saw them, tracks in the snow. They looked like deer prints, but wrong somehow, too deep. And the distance between them, nothing natural moves like that. My radio crackled to life, startling me. Attention all rangers. Weather update. Blizzard warning issued for tonight. Repeat. Blizzard warning. All personnel return to station immediately. I frowned. The storm wasn't supposed to hit for another 3 days. I glanced at the sky. The clouds were gathering faster than they should. Much faster. Something else bothered me. The woods were silent. No birds singing, no squirrels chattering. It was like every animal had packed up and left. In my 8 years as a ranger, I'd never seen the forest so empty. The wind shifted and a smell hit me, sweet but rotten, like meat gone bad mixed with pine sap. My stomach turned. I steered my canoe toward a small inlet where I knew there was an old hunter's cabin. As I got closer, I could see the door swinging open in the wind. That wasn't right. Nobody leaves doors open in this cold. By the time I pulled my canoe onto shore, the gentle snowfall had turned angry. The wind howled, driving snow sideways. The temperature dropped so fast I could feel it, 20 degrees in minutes. This wasn't natural. I trudged through deepening snow to the cabin and pushed the door fully open. Inside, plates of food sat on the table, frozen solid and half-eaten, like someone had been in the middle of dinner and just vanished. I pulled out my compass to check my bearings. The needle spun wildly, rotating in complete circles instead of pointing north. A chill that had nothing to do with the temperature ran down my spine. Darkness was falling fast, and I was lost with a useless compass as the worst storm I'd ever seen closed in around me, and something about those tracks in the snow kept nagging at me. Something familiar that I couldn't quite place. Something that reminded me of my brother. I huddled in the cabin as the wind screamed outside. My hand went to my chest pocket, feeling the small lump there. My silver Olympic medal. I keep it wrapped in cloth, always close to my heart. A reminder that I'm strong, that I can survive anything, well, almost anything. I used to be someone else before I became a ranger. Marianne Foster, Olympic biathlete. Cross-country skiing and shooting were my life. Second place in the Winter Games 15 years ago. Then my right knee gave out during training. Just like that, my career was over. The medal caught the dim light as I unwrapped it. Sometimes, when things get scary out here, touching it helps me remember who I am. I put another log in the small stove and thought about my brother Tommy. He died in these same woods when I was 23. We grew up camping and hunting here, but that winter day he went out alone. They never found his body, just his boots, set neatly by the edge of a frozen lake, like he'd stepped out of them and walked away. A sharp crack from outside made me jump, probably just a tree branch breaking under the weight of snow, but still, I checked that my rifle was loaded. I'm good at staying alive in winter. It's what I do. I know how to build shelters in minutes, how to read the sky and feel weather changes. Coming 7 winters I've been stationed here, and I've never lost anyone on my watch until last month. A family of 4 found frozen in their tent. They had all the right gear. They knew what they were doing. But when we found them, their bodies were twisted in strange ways, like they were trying to... I don't want to think about it. The local Ojibwe elders started talking then, about winter, hunger spirits, old stories I used to laugh at. I'm not laughing anymore. Wind rattled the cabin windows, and I thought about David, my friend, my fellow ranger, missing for a week now. I was the one who suggested he patrol the north section. It's beautiful this time of year, I told him. Those might be the last words I ever said to him. My boss told me to stop looking. He's gone, Marianne. The storm got him. But I couldn't accept that. That's why I was out here today, off my assigned route. Looking for any sign of David. I couldn't sleep, so I stared at the ceiling. Every night for the past week, I've had the same dream. I'm so hungry, hungrier than I've ever been, and I'm eating something raw, something I shouldn't eat. I always wake up with the taste of blood in my mouth, though I never find any cuts. The wind suddenly died down. The silence was worse than the howling. I pulled on my coat and boots. The storm had paused, which meant I had a chance to get my bearings before it started up again. I stepped outside into knee-deep snow. The moon peeked through racing clouds, turning everything silver and strange. Tomorrow, I'd try to find my way back to the station. But first, in this brief calm, I needed to look for David one more time. I didn't know then that I should have stayed inside, that some things in the winter woods are worse than any storm. The flashlight beam cut through the darkness as I trudged through the snow. The storm had taken a breath, but I could feel it gathering strength again. I had maybe an hour before it hit full force. That's when I saw them, David's snowshoes. They were standing straight up in the ice, like he'd been walking and just disappeared, like he'd been plucked right out of them. My heart hammered in my chest. This wasn't right. People don't vanish like that. I bent down to examine the snowshoes, when I noticed something else. Small drops of blood in the snow, fresh blood. It should have frozen solid in this cold, but steam rose from each red drop. I followed the trail with my flashlight. The blood drops led deeper into the trees. The wind picked up again, driving snow into my face. The thermometer on my watch read 40 below zero. Dangerous cold, the kind that freezes skin in minutes. I should have turned back. Anyone with sense would have, but then my radio crackled. So hungry. The voice was weak, breaking up. David's voice. Something's following. Please help. David! I shouted into the radio. Where are you? Can you hear me? Nothing but static answered. I kept following the blood drops, moving deeper into the forest. The trees grew thicker here, blocking what little moonlight broke through the clouds. That's when the smell hit me. Roasting meat. My stomach growled painfully. I hadn't eaten since morning, and suddenly I was starving. I could almost see it. A feast laid out between the trees. But I blinked, and it was gone. Just snow and darkness. I reached for my pack, for the beef jerky I always carry. But when I pulled it out, it was crawling with tiny white worms. I dropped it with a yelp. My water bottles were next, filled with black liquid that definitely wasn't water anymore. Something was very wrong in these woods. I turned to go back, to follow my own tracks to safety. That's when I noticed them changing. The footprints I'd made just minutes before were transforming, stretching, deepening, turning into something like hoofprints, as if something was walking exactly where I had walked, following me. The storm came back with a scream. The snow didn't fall naturally. It swirled in patterns, in spirals that seemed to watch me, herding me, pushing me further into the trees. The wind made the pines creak and groan. But it wasn't. Just the wind. The sounds were too much like voices, like moaning. Whenever I thought about turning around, the moaning got louder. I checked my watch. I'd been walking for hours, but I wasn't tired. I wasn't even cold anymore, just hungry. So hungry. I'd never felt hunger like this. a gnawing, clawing thing inside me. I'd eaten all my emergency rations, but it didn't help. Nothing helped. The hunger just grew, like something living inside me. The trees thinned ahead, opening into a small clearing, and that's when I saw it for the first time. Just a glimpse through the swirling snow. A figure, tall and thin, so thin, like a person, who hadn't eaten in months. But the head wasn't human at all. It had the skull of a deer, antlers reaching toward the dark sky, and it was watching me. I froze. The thing standing between the trees shouldn't exist. It couldn't exist. But there it was. Its body looked human-like, but wrong. Skin stretched too tight over bones, ribs poking through like it was starving to death. But its head was the skull of a deer, antlers branching up toward the night sky. It didn't move at first, just watched me with empty eye sockets that somehow still saw everything. When it breathed out, the steam from its breath didn't just float away. It formed shapes in the air, letters, words, my name. Marianne, then another name. Tommy, my brother's name. And then, over and over, hunger, hunger, hunger. I blinked and it was gone. I spun around, heart pounding, nothing but trees and snow. Then movement caught my eye, something running on all fours between distant pines. Fast, too fast. It stopped and stood upright, swaying gently as it watched me from a different spot. The hunger in my stomach twisted painfully. I doubled over, feeling like I hadn't eaten in weeks. When I straightened up, I saw what it had left for me. A dead rabbit in the snow, but not just dead, half-eaten, its insides spilling out. The worst part, my mouth watered at the sight. I was so hungry that for a split second I actually considered, no, this thing was playing with me, trying to make me like it. I raised my rifle, finally finding my courage. But the moment I aimed at the creature, frost formed on the barrel. The metal cracked with a sound like a gunshot, making me drop it in surprise. Marianne, help me. The voice came from behind me, my brother's voice, exactly as I remembered it. I'm lost, Marianne. I'm so cold. Please, find me. I knew it wasn't really Tommy. Tommy had been gone for 15 years. This thing was using his voice, trying to trick me. I stumbled backward, away from the voice, and nearly tripped over something in the snow, a hand, reaching up from a snowdrift. I dug frantically, uncovering a body. David. My friend was still alive, but changed. His arms and legs were longer than they should be, stretching his ranger uniform. His fingers had grown into curved claws. His eyes were sunken deep in his face, but they recognized me. Marianne, he whispered. His voice was weak but human. Run. You have to run. David, what happened to you? I'm going to get you out of here. He shook his head, eyes wide with fear. It's too late for me. I was starving. The storm. It brought me food, made me eat. Things I shouldn't have. I noticed now that his teeth had sharpened to points. It's changing me, he said. The Wendigo. That's what it is. The Ojibwe were right. I'm not leaving you, I said, trying to help him up. Listen. His voice was suddenly stronger. It controls the storm. It makes you hungry. Then it makes you eat, and you become like it. As if in answer, the blizzard around us intensified. Ice crystals sliced through the air like tiny knives, cutting my exposed skin. It wants you, David said. It's been watching you since your brother, since Tommy became... He never finished the sentence. The Wendigo appeared behind him, moving so fast it was almost a blur. It reached for us with long, bony fingers. I turned to run, but there was nowhere to go. The storm had us surrounded, a wall of white in every direction, and the hunger inside me was growing stronger by the second. I backed away from the Wendigo and David, my feet crunching on ice. Too late, I realized I'd stepped onto the frozen lake. A sharp crack split the air. The ice gave way beneath me. I plunged into water so cold, it felt like fire. My heavy winter clothes dragged me down as I fought to find the hole I'd fallen through. Everything was dark. My lungs screamed for air. My hand broke the surface, clutching at the edge of the ice. I pulled myself up, gasping and shivering. The Wendigo stood watching from the shore, not moving, just waiting. Waiting for the cold to do its work. Waiting for me to become too weak to fight. David suddenly appeared beside the creature. His transformation had progressed. His neck longer, his back hunched, but his eyes were still his own. "Run, Marianne," he shouted. Then he did something I'll never forget. He threw himself at the Wendigo, tackling the monster with his changing body. "Go!" he screamed as they tumbled into the snow. I crawled across the ice, my clothes already freezing solid. I had to get to shore, had to find shelter, or I'd die in minutes. As I struggled to my feet, I saw something horrible. The Wendigo had David in its grasp, but David wasn't fighting anymore. He was sinking into the creature. His face pressed against the Wendigo's chest, visible for a moment beneath its skin, like he was behind frosted glass. Then he disappeared completely. It had absorbed him. I stumbled through the snow, knowing the creature would come for me next. My thoughts moved slowly through my freezing brain. I needed shelter. I needed fire. I needed a weapon. My hand touched the lump in my breast pocket, my silver medal. An old memory surfaced. My grandmother, an Ojibwe elder telling stories by the fire. "Silver burns the winter spirits," she had said. "That's why we wear silver jewelry in the deep cold months." I'd thought it was just a pretty story. Now I wondered. I found a small cave formed by fallen trees covered in snow. Inside, I worked quickly despite my numb fingers. I pulled out my emergency stove and melted my silver medal. Using bullet molds from my hunting kit, I formed 2 silver bullets. They wouldn't fit my rifle, but they would fit my flare gun. Outside, the storm had reached impossible strength. The temperature dropped so low that my tears froze on my cheeks. The Wendigo was angry. I set my trap. I built a small shelter outside the cave entrance. Inside it, I left my ranger hat and coat, stuffed with snow to look like a person. Then I waited in the cave, flare gun loaded with silver. It didn't take long. The storm parted like a curtain as the Wendigo approached my fake shelter. It moved, cautiously now, sensing a trap perhaps. But hunger drove it forward, hunger for me. As it tore apart the empty shelter, I stepped out from hiding and raised my flare gun. The Wendigo turned, lightning fast. In the moonlight, I saw something I hadn't noticed before. A scar on its wrist. A small curved mark, exactly like the scar my brother Tommy had gotten when we were kids. We'd been carving our initials into a tree, and he'd slipped with the knife. The truth hit me like a physical blow. This creature had once been my brother. Somehow, 15 years ago, lost in these woods, Tommy had become this. The Wendigo that had once been my brother stepped toward me. Its breath formed words again. "Join me, Marianne, always hungry, never alone." For a moment I hesitated. This was Tommy, my little brother. But no, Tommy was gone. This was just the thing that had consumed him. The creature lunged. I fired. The silver flare hit it square in the chest. For a second nothing happened. Then light began to glow from inside it, spreading through its body like cracks in ice. The Wendigo threw back its antlered head and made a sound I'll never forget. Part scream, part howl. It began to dissolve, breaking apart like smoke in the wind. The storm died with it, snowflakes hanging suspended in the suddenly still air before. Gently falling to the ground, I collapsed in the snow, exhausted beyond words. When search teams found me the next morning, I told them I'd gotten lost in the storm. Nothing more. That was 3 months ago. I'm still a ranger here in the Boundary Waters, but I've made some changes. New protocol requires all rangers to wear silver tokens on patrol. Mine is a small medallion melted from what was left of my Olympic medal. The forest feels different now. quieter in a peaceful way, not the unnatural silence from before. But sometimes, on the coldest nights, I hear scratching at my cabin door, and each morning after those nights, I find strange, elongated footprints in the snow outside. They say, hunger like that doesn't die easily. It just waits for its next chance. I keep my silver close, and I never ever go out alone in the winter woods. I wasn't alone in the ancient cliff dwellings. I knew it the moment the ravens started talking. My name is Denise Rodriguez. I'm a park ranger at Mesa Verde National Park in Colorado, and I've spent 20 years studying the homes carved into these canyon walls by the ancestral Puebloan people. But in all those years, I've never felt what I felt that evening as the sun painted the sandstone cliffs a deep, burning orange. The ravens came first. Usually they keep their distance, but that day they circled so close I could see their eyes, watching me. Their calls bounced off the canyon walls, and I swear it sounded like they were saying my name. Denise. Denise. Just thinking about it now makes the hair on my arms stand up. I was taking photos in one of the restricted ruins, an area we keep locked up to protect it from tourists. The air around me suddenly went from warm to freezing cold in seconds, then back to warm again. My breath made clouds in front of my face, then disappeared just as quickly. That's not normal, even for desert weather. As I walked across the dusty floor, something caught my eye. Footprints that weren't mine, fresh ones, in an area nobody had permission to enter except me. I checked my keys. The gates were definitely locked when I arrived. "Hello," I called out. "This area is restricted." No answer, just the ravens echoing my voice back to me. I knelt down near a wall with ancient handprints preserved in clay. I'd photographed them just yesterday for our records. But something was wrong. Several prints were now smudged, as if someone had pressed their own hand against the 1,000-year-old marks. I lifted my camera to take comparison photos, pointing it at the wall where ancient artists had painted tall figures with animal heads. The strange figures had always given me chills. They looked like people wearing animal skulls, their bodies too long and thin to be human. Click! My camera screen went black. What the... I checked the battery. Full charge this morning, now completely dead. This was the third time this week my electronics had failed around these specific drawings. As I turned to leave, something crunched under my boot. I looked down and froze. Pottery shards, fresh breaks, the edges still sharp, but the design on them, a specific black and white pattern, matched pottery made 1,000 years ago. I picked up a piece carefully. This wasn't a modern fake. The materials, the craftsmanship, it was either an impossible find or an impossible replica. Either way, it shouldn't exist. My radio crackled suddenly, making me jump. "Ya'ate, she hastin," a voice whispered through the static. I know enough Navajo to recognize a greeting, but none of our current staff speak the language. Before I could respond, the radio went silent again. The sun was setting fast now, casting long shadows across Chapin Mesa. I needed to head back, but movement at the edge of the ruins caught my eye. Coyotes, at least 6 of them standing in a perfect circle on the ridge. They weren't running or hunting, they were just watching. As I stared, one moved to a different position and another immediately took its place, like guards changing shifts. The wind picked up, whistling through the rock formations. But winds don't whisper names. Denise, Denise. I hadn't told anyone I was coming here today. I hadn't led any tours or introduced myself to visitors. Nobody here should know my name. That's when I knew for certain, whatever walked these ruins after dark, it wasn't human. And now it knew who I was. I hurried back to my office as the last bit of daylight faded from the sky. My flashlight beam bounced along the trail, making the shadows dance in ways that seemed almost purposeful. I kept looking over my shoulder. unable to shake the feeling of being watched. Once inside, I locked the door and pulled out the small white stone figure from my pocket. It was my lucky charm, a gift from an old Hopi man named Thomas when I first started working with Native American communities. It looked like a simple doll, carved from white stone. Always know your own face in these canyons, he had told me. I never fully understood what he meant until recently. I placed the figure on my desk next to my journal. The journal was thick, with notes, newspaper clippings, and strange stories I'd been collecting for years. Stories about people who change shapes, people who steal faces. I didn't start out looking for these stories. I came to Mesa Verde 3 years ago after leaving my job at Canyon de Chelly National Monument. I loved working there until I started noticing problems with how artifacts were being handled. Some would disappear, then reappear in different places. Others would show signs of being touched or moved when the storage rooms were supposed to be locked. When I reported it, my boss just smiled and said I was being paranoid. Old buildings make things shift, he told me. But I knew better. Someone or something was touching those artifacts at night. So I requested a transfer to Mesa Verde, a fresh start. But the strange things followed me here too. I opened my journal and added today's date. Below it, I wrote about the ravens, the footprints, and the pottery shards. Then I added a note about my dream last night, the third this week, where I was wearing someone else's face like a mask. I woke up with a nosebleed again, and 3 long scratches on my arm that I don't remember getting. As I wrote, my hand shook slightly. 3 weeks ago, my friend and fellow researcher Dr. Wilson went missing while exploring a newly discovered kiva, an underground ceremonial room. The search teams found nothing but his glasses, sitting perfectly folded on a rock. No footprints leading away, no signs of an animal attack. He just vanished. But yesterday, a tourist family told me their little boy had been talking to the nice glasses man named Wilson near the visitor center. When they pointed to where their son had been playing, no one was there. I flipped through my notes from the past month. The weather patterns had been strange, sudden drops in temperature, winds that changed direction instantly. Wildlife was behaving oddly too, and visitors kept reporting feeling uneasy, like they were being followed. My eyes fell on a small bundle next to my office door. Another protection charm, probably left by one of the local indigenous staff members. They'd been leaving them for weeks now, little bags of herbs, braided grass, small carved stones. They never said anything about them, just left them silently. I'd collected them all, not wanting to seem ungrateful, though I wasn't sure what they were protecting me from, until... Now I pulled up the security camera footage on my computer. I'd installed extra cameras around the ruins after noticing artifacts moved overnight, despite the locked gates. Most of the footage showed nothing unusual, but then I spotted something that made my stomach twist. One of our tour guides, Mark, walking through the main path. Except something was wrong with how he moved. His legs bent at slightly wrong angles, his arms swung too far, and when he turned toward the camera, his smile stretched just a little too wide for his face. But the strangest thing, according to the schedule, Mark wasn't even working yesterday when this footage was recorded. My phone buzzed with a text. It was from Dr. Wilson's number. "I see you looking for me. Stop." He's watching through my eyes now. I dropped the phone, like it had burned me. Wilson had been missing for 3 weeks. His phone was never found. I picked it up again with shaking hands and texted back, "Where are you?" The reply came instantly. "Everywhere, nowhere. I'm becoming him, Denise, or he's becoming me. I can't tell anymore." My face hurts. A cold feeling crept up my spine as I remembered my grandmother's warnings. She claimed to be part Spanish, part Puebloan, though she never knew exactly which tribe. She taught me protection rituals when I was a child, how to cleanse a space with sage, how to recognize signs of skinwalkers. I'd always thought they were just stories meant to keep children from wandering off alone. Now I wasn't so sure. My grandmother's voice echoed in my memory. A skinwalker can take your face while you sleep. That's why you must always know your own face. I looked down at the white stone figure on my desk. For the first time, I noticed tiny cracks forming across its smooth surface. I didn't sleep that night. The text messages from Wilson's phone had stopped, but that only made me more worried. I spent hours reviewing security footage, looking for anything unusual. By morning, my eyes burned from staring at the screen, but I'd found something. Several somethings, actually. Staff members appearing, on camera with movements that weren't quite right. Visitors who seemed to be in two places at once. And worst of all, shadows moving without people to cast them. I splashed cold water on my face in the bathroom and froze. My reflection looked wrong. When I tilted my head, my reflection followed a split second too late. When I frowned, it smiled just for a moment before matching my expression. "Get it together, Denise," I whispered to myself. "You're just tired." But as I turned away, I swear my reflection stayed facing forward, watching me go. I grabbed my keys and radio and headed out. The morning sun felt good on my skin, warm and real and normal. Maybe I was just exhausted and seeing things. Maybe there was a simple explanation for everything, that hope died when I reached the newly discovered storage room we'd unsealed last week. The room had been untouched for centuries, sealed with clay and stone by the ancient Puebloans. Inside, we'd found perfectly preserved baskets and pottery. We'd carefully documented everything and sealed the entrance with modern locks until the preservation team could arrive next week. But now the lock was broken, the door slightly ajar. "Hello?" I called, shining my flashlight inside. "Is anyone in there?" No answer. I pushed the door open wider and stepped in. The dust on the floor told the story. Footprints, human at first, then changing every few steps. Some looked like coyote prints, others like bird talons, and some I couldn't identify at all. They crisscrossed the room, stopping at each artifact. Several baskets were moved. A clay pot was turned upside down. And on the back wall, something new had been drawn in what looked like red clay. A crude stick figure with too many limbs and a blank circle for a face. My radio crackled. "Denise, you there?" It was Miguel from the visitor center. "I'm here," I replied, my voice shaking slightly. "There's a family here insisting their daughter talked to Dr. Wilson yesterday afternoon. Says he was acting weird and wanted to see her face up close. Thought you'd want to know." My heart pounded. What did they say he looked like? Tall man, glasses, gray beard. That's Wilson, all right, except what, Miguel? They said his eyes were yellow, and he walked funny, like he wasn't used to his own legs. I thanked him and signed off, trying to stay calm. This was the second report of Wilson being seen. First the boy, now this girl. But Wilson had been missing for weeks. As I closed the storage room door, a group of deer emerged from the trees nearby. At first, I thought nothing of it. Wildlife is common here. But they walked right up to me, showing no fear, their eyes fixed on me as they formed a half circle, blocking my path back to the main trail. "Shoo!" I waved my arms, but they didn't move. One of them made a sound, not a deer sound, more like someone trying to speak through an animal's throat. I backed away, slowly, and took the long way around, my heart racing the whole time. When I glanced back, the deer were still watching me, their heads turning in unison to track my movement. Back at the visitor center, I noticed the staff acting strangely. Miguel, who normally couldn't stop talking, was completely silent, staring out the window. Lisa, our security guard, who had been vegetarian for 20 years, was eating beef jerky at her desk. When I asked her about it, she just smiled and said, "People change." Later that afternoon, I snuck into the archives, searching for any record of similar occurrences in the park's history. I found a box of old photographs from the 1950s, mostly boring shots of staff and tourists. Then I saw it. A family photo from 1957 standing in front of the cliff dwellings, and in the background, barely noticeable unless you were looking for it, a man in modern clothes. The exact same clothes the tourist in the lobby was wearing right now. My hands shook as I pulled out the alabaster figure from my pocket. The tiny cracks I'd noticed yesterday had grown larger. As I held it, the figure suddenly split open with a soft crack. Inside was another identical figure, smaller but perfect in every detail. A knock at the door made me jump. "Ranger Rodriguez?" It was Mark's voice, the tour guide from the strange security footage. "Are you in there? I need to talk to you about Dr. Wilson. I saw him last night." Something in his voice was wrong, flat, like someone reading words they didn't understand. "Just a minute," I called, quickly pocketing both pieces of the figure. I looked around for another exit, but there was only the one door. "He told me to find you," Mark continued. "He said you have something that belongs to him, something about faces." The doorknob turned slowly. "He's very interested in your face. Denise, he says it's perfect." I grabbed a letter opener from the desk, a poor weapon but better than nothing, and stood to the side of the door as it swung open. Mark stepped in, but he moved all wrong, like a puppet with loose strings. His head turned in a complete circle as he searched the room, finally spotting me against the wall. "There you are," he said with a smile that stretched too wide. "Dr. Wilson is waiting. We're all waiting. Don't you want to join us? Don't you want to give your face to the collection?" Behind him, through the window, I saw more staff members approaching, all walking with that same wrong gait, all wearing the same wrong smile. I ducked under Mark's reaching arms and ran for the door, pushing past him as he tried to grab me. His hands felt cold and dry, like old paper. "Denise!" he called after me, but I didn't stop. I sprinted through the visitor center, past tourists and staff who all turned to watch me with the same blank expression. Outside, I jumped into my park ranger truck and locked the doors. My hands shook as I started the engine. Where could I go? Who could I trust? I needed time to think. I drove to a remote area of the park I knew well, an overlook few tourists visited. As I parked and stepped out, the evening light cast long shadows across the canyon. I took a few deep breaths, trying to calm my racing heart. Movement caught my eye, just at the edge of my vision. When I turned to look, nothing was there. But every time I looked away, I could see something shifting in the corner of my eye, a tall, thin shape that moved like nothing I'd ever seen before, jerky and fast, like a bug skittering across the ground. "I know you're there," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. "What do you want?" A familiar voice answered from behind me. "I want to talk, Denise. That's all." I spun around. Dr. Wilson stood there, looking exactly as I remembered him. Tall, grey beard, glasses, but something was wrong. His smile was too wide, his eyes blinked too slowly, and his skin, it looked almost like a mask stretched over something else. "Wilson?" My voice was barely a whisper, in a manner of speaking. He tilted his head at an impossible angle. "I borrowed this face. Do you like it?" As he spoke, I noticed his expressions didn't match his words. When he smiled, his eyes showed fear. When he laughed, his forehead wrinkled with pain. "What are you?" I asked, backing away slowly. "I am very old," Not Wilson said. "I was here before the cliff dwellers, before the Spanish. I have had many names." He stepped forward, matching my retreat. "The Navajo call me Skinwalker. Others call me Wendigo or Shapeshifter. Names don't matter, only faces matter." As he spoke, a breeze picked up and I watched in horror as a small piece of skin at his neck peeled away like paper, revealing darkness underneath. He pressed it back casually, smoothing it like you'd smooth a wrinkled shirt. "Where is the real Wilson?" I demanded. Not Wilson smiled, still here, watching, screaming sometimes. He tapped his own forehead. "He sees what I see, feels what I feel, but he can't control anything anymore." I clutched the broken alabaster figure in my pocket. "What do you want from me?" "Your face would make a fine addition to my collection." He gestured vaguely toward the north. "I have so many now. Staff, tourists, even a few children. Such elastic faces children have. Easy to wear." My stomach turned at his words. "You're stealing people's faces, wearing them." "Not stealing," he corrected, looking offended. "Collecting. Preserving. Some collectors prefer butterflies or stamps. I prefer faces." His smile dropped suddenly. "And I need yours. You see too much. Know too much." He took another step toward me, and in the fading light I saw his shadow. It didn't match his shape. It was longer, with too many limbs reaching out in all directions. I pulled out my phone and snapped a picture quickly. The flash made him flinch. When I looked at the screen, my blood ran cold. The photo showed not Wilson, but a blurred figure with elongated limbs and no face, just a blank space where features should be. "That's not polite," he hissed, his voice changing, becoming deeper and raspy. "Cameras can't capture my true nature." "Stay back," I warned, though I had nothing to threaten him with. He laughed, a sound like dry leaves scraping against stone. "Or what? You'll call for help? Who would come? Half the staff wear my faces now." As if to prove his point, I saw movement all around us. Park rangers, tour guides, security staff, all emerging from the trees, all moving with that same wrong gait, all wearing that same wrong smile. And then I saw something that made my heart stop. Myself. A perfect copy of me, walking among them, wearing my uniform, my face. But the eyes were all wrong. "How?" I couldn't finish the question. "I only need to see a face once to wear it," the skinwalker explained. "I've been wearing yours at night while you sleep, walking among the tourists, learning your habits, your voice." He gestured to my double. "She's not as good as the original, of course. I need your actual face for that." My double smiled at me, the expression hollow and mechanical. The skinwalker wearing Wilson's face began to change before my eyes. The skin around his mouth stretched, then split. Beneath it was nothing but darkness. His movements became more fluid, less human. He grew taller, limbs extending like a spider's. "No more games," he said, his voice now a chorus of different tones speaking together. "Give me your face, Denise Rodriguez." I turned and ran, heart pounding in my chest. Behind me, I heard many footsteps giving chase. I didn't look back. I couldn't. I knew what I would see, a horde of familiar faces with empty eyes, all controlled by the skinwalker. I headed for the ancient ruins, my flashlight beam bouncing wildly ahead of me. I had one chance, the old kiva we'd discovered last month, where Wilson had disappeared. Something about that place was important. Something about it had drawn both Wilson and the skinwalker. As I ran, I heard my own voice calling my name from the darkness. "Denise, don't run from yourself. Everyone joins the collection eventually." I ducked under Mark's reaching arms and ran for the door, pushing past him as he tried to grab me. His hands felt cold and dry like old paper. "Denise," he called after me, but I didn't stop. I sprinted through the visitor center, past tourists and staff, who all turned to watch me with the same blank expression. Outside, I jumped into my park ranger truck and locked the doors. My hands shook as I started the engine. Where could I go? Who could I trust? I needed time to think. I drove to a remote area of the park I knew well, an overlook few tourists visited. As I parked and stepped out, the evening light cast long shadows across the canyon. I took a few deep breaths, trying to calm my racing heart. Movement caught my eye, just at the edge of my vision. When I turned to look, nothing was there. But every time I looked away, I could see something shifting in the corner of my eye. A tall, thin shape that moved like nothing I'd ever seen before, jerky and fast, like a bug skittering across the ground. "I know you're there," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. "What do you want?" A familiar voice answered from behind me. "I want to talk, Denise. That's all." I spun around. Dr. Wilson stood there looking exactly as I remembered him. Tall, grey beard, glasses. But something was wrong. His smile was too wide, his eyes blinked too slowly, and his skin, it looked almost like a mask stretched over something else. Wilson? My voice was barely a whisper, in a manner of speaking. He tilted his head at an impossible angle. I borrowed this face. Do you like it? As he spoke, I noticed his expressions didn't match his words. When he smiled, his eyes showed fear. When he laughed, his forehead wrinkled with pain. What are you? I asked, backing away slowly. I am very old, Not Wilson said. I was here before the cliff dwellers, before the Spanish. I have had many names. He stepped forward, matching my retreat. The Navajo call me Skinwalker. Others call me Wendigo or Shapeshifter. Names don't matter, only faces matter. As he spoke, a breeze picked up, and I watched in horror as a small piece of skin at his neck peeled away like paper, revealing darkness underneath. He pressed it back casually, smoothing it like you'd smooth a wrinkled shirt. Where is the real? Wilson, I demanded. Not Wilson smiled. Still here, watching, screaming sometimes. He tapped his own forehead. He sees what I see, feels what I feel, but he can't control anything anymore. I clutched the broken alabaster figure in my pocket. What do you want from me? Your face would make a fine addition to my collection. He gestured vaguely toward the north. I have so many now, staff, tourists, even a few children. Such elastic faces children have, easy to wear. My stomach turned at his words. You're stealing people's faces, wearing them? Not stealing, he erected, looking offended. Collecting, preserving. Some collectors prefer butterflies or stamps. I prefer faces. His smile dropped suddenly. And I need yours. You see too much, know too much. He took another step toward me, and in the fading light I saw his shadow. It didn't match his shape. It was longer, with too many limbs reaching out in all directions. I pulled out my phone and snapped a picture quickly. The flash made him flinch. When I looked at the screen, my blood ran cold. The photo showed not Wilson, but a blurred figure with elongated limbs and no face. Just a blank space where features should be. That's not polite, he hissed, his voice changing, becoming deeper and raspy. Cameras can't capture my true nature. Stay back, I warned, though I had nothing to threaten him with. He laughed, a sound like dry leaves scraping against stone. Oh, what? You'll call for help? Who would come? Half the staff wear my faces now. As if to prove his point, I saw movement all around us. Park rangers, tour guides, security staff, all emerging from the trees, all moving with that same wrong. A gate, all wearing that same wrong smile. And then I saw something that made my heart stop. Myself, a perfect copy of me, walking among them, wearing my uniform, my face, but the eyes were all wrong. How? I couldn't finish the question. I only need to see a face once to wear it, the Skinwalker explained. I've been wearing yours at night while you sleep, walking among the tourists, learning your habits, your voice. He gestured to my double. She's not as good as the original, of course. I need your actual face for that. My double smiled at me, the expression hollow and mechanical. The Skinwalker wearing Wilson's face began to change before my eyes. The skin around his mouth stretched, then split. Beneath it was nothing but darkness. His movements became more fluid, less human. He grew taller, limbs extending like a spider's. No more games, he said, his voice now a chorus of different tones speaking together. Give me your face, Denise Rodriguez. I turned and ran, heart pounding in my chest. Behind me, I heard many footsteps giving chase. I didn't look back, I couldn't. I knew what I would see. A horde of familiar faces with empty eyes, all controlled by the Skinwalker. I headed for the ancient ruins, my flashlight beam bouncing wildly ahead of me. I had one chance, the old kiva we'd discovered last month, where Wilson had disappeared. Something about that place was important. Something about it had drawn both Wilson and the Skinwalker. As I ran, I heard my own voice calling my name from the darkness. "Denise, don't run from yourself. Everyone joins. The collection eventually." I knew I was in trouble when I heard the rocks singing. I've been in caves for most of my life, and rocks aren't supposed to sing. They don't make musical notes like someone playing a piano deep underground. But that's exactly what I heard that day, 700 feet below, where the tourists walk in Carlsbad Caverns. My name is Fred Gaines. I'm 45, and I've been a park ranger here for 8 years. Before that, I worked in mines until a tunnel fell in on me. I was stuck in the dark for 6 days, breathing bad air, wondering if I'd ever see daylight again. 6 days alone with nothing but the weight of the mountain above me and thoughts of my wife Linda and our little girl Emily waiting at home. But they weren't waiting. While rescue teams were digging me out, a flood washed their car off a bridge. That's why I make myself go into tight spaces now. Some call it facing your fears. I call it punishment. Control to Ranger Gaines. Check-in time. Over. My radio crackled with a faraway voice. "Gaines here. Still mapping the new section. Everything's fine." I lied. Nothing was fine about this place. My headlight showed a room bigger than any we'd found before. The icicle-shaped rocks hanging from the ceiling weren't scattered like they should be. They made perfect patterns, circles, triangles, and shapes with perfect corners. Nature doesn't do that. I looked at my depth meter and frowned. It said I was nearly 3,000 feet down. Impossible, since we knew Carlsbad only went down to 1,600 feet. I tapped the meter. Must be broken, but it wasn't just the depth that bothered me. It was the heat. Caves get colder the deeper you go, not hotter. Yet sweat ran down my back, soaking my shirt. The air felt thick, like trying to breathe through a wet towel. I bent down to look at a strange mark on the cave floor. It looked like a painting, simple figures standing around what might be a fire or a hole. Last week, I'd sent similar paintings to be tested, and the results made no sense. 65 million years old. That's older than people should be. The lab said the samples must be dirty. Something moved above me. Bats, hundreds of them, flying in a perfect spiral overhead. Then, as if someone had turned off a switch, they all vanished into a crack in the wall barely big enough for my hand. Took out my tape recorder. October 12th, 1972, still exploring new rooms, strange rock formations and weird bat behavior noted. I spoke quietly, but my voice echoed back with extra whispers I hadn't made. When I played it back later, those whispers would form words in languages I didn't know. That's when I saw it, half stuck in the wall like it had grown there. An old mining pick, its wooden handle turned to stone. I reached to touch it, and the ground under my feet shook in perfect steady beats. 1, 2, 3, 4, like footsteps coming closer. Then nothing. I pulled the old watch from my shirt pocket. Inside was the picture of Linda and Emily, smiling, from happier days. I never opened it underground, just a silly ranger superstition. But right then, I needed to see their faces. The earth shook again, but differently. A single, hard jolt that almost knocked me down. When my light stopped shaking, I froze. The cave had changed. The passage I'd come through was gone, now just solid rock. And my map, carefully drawn over hours, now showed paths that led nowhere and tunnels that couldn't exist. I was all alone, in a cave that seemed to breathe and move, and something down here knew I was watching. People always ask why I came back to caves after what happened at Blue Mesa Mine. They think I'm brave, or maybe just crazy. Truth is, I'm trying to make peace with the dark. It's not working out so well. The doctor the mining company sent me to said I had trauma, surviving the cave-in, only to learn my family was gone. He gave me pills for the panic attacks, small white tablets that make the fear less sharp when the walls start closing in. I keep them in my pocket, but don't take them much. Down here, being scared keeps you alert. After the funeral, I couldn't. work in mines anymore. Too many bad dreams about rocks falling and air running out. I sold our house in Colorado, packed the few things I wanted to keep, and drove south until I got to New Mexico. When I saw they needed rangers at Carlsbad Caverns, something clicked. Face what scares you, right? My first year as a ranger, I stayed above ground. I worked at the visitor center, fixed trails, anything to avoid going down into the caves. Then one day, a little boy got lost from his tour group. 8 years old, wandered off by himself. Nobody noticed for 20 minutes. I knew right where he'd be. There's a small room off the main tour path with crystals that glow blue when light hits them. It's pretty but easy to miss if you don't know it's there. The boy was sitting on the ground, looking up at the crystals when I found him. They're talking to each other, he whispered when I knelt beside him. Can't you hear them? Kids say strange things, but the way he said it stuck with me. That night I went back to that spot alone and just listened. Nothing at first, then something. Not words exactly, but patterns in the water drops, rhythms too perfect to be random. That was the start of my secret research. I began collecting stories, old newspapers, diaries from early explorers, local legends. The Native Americans nearby have stories about those who live below, spirits that guard paths to the center of the earth. Early Spanish explorers wrote about hearing voices from deep cracks, calling their names. Most rangers laugh at ideas about a hollow earth. Science says it's impossible. The middle of our planet is solid iron surrounded by hot, melted rock. But science also says caves don't change shape overnight, and I've seen that happen with my own eyes. I've mapped every part of the public areas and most of the off-limits zones too. The walls of my apartment are covered with detailed maps, matched with reports of strange happenings. People go missing around major cave systems every 17 years, all over the world. Not just here. Places like Mammoth Cave in Kentucky, caves in France, Vietnam. The pattern is there if you know how to look. Last month, I found something in the old park files, a journal from 1936 belonging to Dr. Howard Spencer, who came to study the caverns. His last entry described perfect shapes that shouldn't form, naturally in a newly found room. The next day, he went into the cave with 2 guides and never came out. The official report called it an accident, unsafe passages, inexperienced explorers. But Spencer had studied caves for 30 years. The journal had rough maps to areas we've never officially recorded. That's what led me here, following the path of a man who vanished 36 years ago. You're chasing ghosts again, Fred, my boss said when I asked permission for this solo mapping trip. Just be careful down there. Our equipment's been giving weird readings lately. He didn't know the half of it. The local guides who sometimes work with us have been refusing to enter certain areas. Manuel, who's led tours here for decades, pressed a small carved stone into my hand last week. Protection, he said simply. Some lines were not meant to be crossed. I should have listened. But wanting to know is a powerful thing, especially when you've got nothing left to lose. As I felt the small stone charm in my pocket, I remembered the dreams I'd been having lately. Huge underground cities made of black glass and crystal, filled with figures made of living shadow. In the dreams, they always show me something. A map of tunnels that don't exist on any official survey, except now I was standing in one of those tunnels, and according to my broken depth meter, I was still going down. I've always trusted my tools. In mining and caving, good tools can save your life. So when my compass started spinning in circles, I knew something was really wrong. I'd been exploring the new rooms for 3 days, making a camp in a dry cave I called Base Alpha. Each morning, if you can call it morning when there's no sun, I'd go deeper, drawing my map as I went, always leaving marker tape to find my way back. On the second day, I noticed the first real problem. A big rock spike near my camp had moved. Not fallen or broken, moved. 3 feet to the left of where it had been when I set up my tent. I checked my notes and pictures twice to be sure. The rock was shaped like a twisted horn, and I'd marked its spot as a way to find my camp. "You're getting mixed up," I told myself. "It happens underground." But I didn't believe it. By the third day, I couldn't ignore it anymore. My depth readings jumped all over the place, showing 2,000 feet 1 minute and 5,000 the next. The temperature went up and down, with no pattern. Sometimes I'd shiver in sudden cold, my breath making clouds, then sweat would pour down my face minutes later in awful heat. "Control to Gaines. Daily check-in. Over." The radio crackled more than usual, the voice barely there through the static. "Gaines here. All good. Making progress on the map." Another lie. I should have told them about the weird stuff, asked for help. But they'd pull me out if they knew what was happening, and I needed answers. "Can barely hear you, Gaines. Signals breaking up. Next check-in, 4 o'clock, control out." The radio died after that. I tried many times to make contact, changing channels, checking batteries, nothing. Then exactly 17 minutes later it came back to life, clear as a bell, but only playing empty noise. 17 minutes. The same pattern I'd found with the missing people. I kept going, following a narrow path that went steadily down. My light caught something shiny on the cave wall. Claw marks. Fresh ones, deep enough to cut solid rock. Whatever made them had to be huge, and the lines were too perfect, too evenly spaced to be from any animal. The path opened into another room, and my light showed something that made my blood run cold. Footprints in the fine dust covering the floor. They looked almost human, except each print had 7 toes. They led straight to a solid rock wall and just stopped. I walked up to the wall carefully. The stone looked different here, darker, almost like metal. I pressed my hand against it and pulled back right away. The surface was warm and seemed to give a little under pressure, like skin. When I looked at my hand, it was covered with a fine, oily dust that sparkled under my light. I wiped it off quickly on my pants, but my skin tingled where it had touched. Took samples of the wall stuff in small bottles. When I labeled them with the time, 3:15 p.m., I noticed something odd about my watch. The second hand moved in jerks, sometimes racing ahead, sometimes nearly stopping. I checked my backup. Clock. According to that, I'd been in this room for over 3 hours, not the 20 minutes I thought. Lost time. Another classic sign from my research. As I turned to leave, my boot kicked something hard that skidded across the floor. I picked it up. A hard hat, standard Park Service issue. The name Rodriguez was written on the brim. Miguel Rodriguez, one of our workers who'd called in sick the past week. The helmet was squashed flat, like squeezed by a giant hand, yet the room ceiling was at least 15 feet high. My heart pounding, I stuffed the crushed hard hat into my pack. Proof. Something real to show when I got back to the surface. If I got back to the surface, I looked at my map, trying to figure out where I was. The paths I'd carefully drawn had changed again. New tunnels appeared where none had been before, and marked paths ended suddenly in my notes. I wasn't mapping the cave anymore, I was tracking how it changed. That's when I saw the wall behind me. The bare rock now showed paintings, simple human figures around a thing with tentacles and eyes. One of the human figures wore what looked like a Park Service uniform. The paint was wet when I touched it. The pictures showed rooms ahead that I hadn't been to yet, rooms where something big waited, shown as a swirl of stone and darkness. My mapping equipment beeped loudly. The ground-scanning radar showed something. Massive below, a hole larger than the entire known cave system. It pulsed on the screen like a heartbeat, and it was right under my feet. The first time I saw it, I didn't really see it at all. I was looking at a group of strange crystals when something moved at the edge of my vision. When I turned, nothing was there, just a normal column of rock. But I could have sworn it had been a spike seconds before. Just tricks from the light, I muttered, though my headlight was working fine. The next time I was ready, I pretended to look at my notes, while watching from the corner of my eye. The stone moved, not like rock falling or settling, but like water changing shape when not watched directly. It was playing games with me. "I can see you," I said, my voice bouncing off the walls. "Whatever you are." The answer came not in words, but in shaking. The hanging rocks above began to hum, making tones that overlapped into something almost like speech. Deep, hollow sounds that I felt in my chest more than heard with my ears. Then it showed itself. From the wall stepped a figure about 7 feet tall. It looked like a person made entirely of swirling stone and crystal, its surface always moving, and flowing like sand in an hourglass. Where a face should be, it had only a smooth, blank surface that occasionally rippled to form crude features. An eye here, the suggestion of a mouth there. I'd found the pit dweller, or more accurately, it had found me. I stood frozen, unable to run, my years of research suddenly made flesh, or stone, before me. My hand crept toward the revolver at my hip, but I knew instinctively it would be useless. The entity moved, with impossible fluidity, stopping about 10 feet away. It raised what might have been an arm, pointing to the wall beside me. Before my eyes, the solid rock flowed like water, forming shapes and symbols, complex mathematical equations that hurt my brain to look at directly. "What are you trying to tell me?" I whispered. In response, the cave wall opposite me became reflective, like a mirror made of polished obsidian. In it, I saw not my reflection, but images of a vast underground civilization. Cities carved into enormous caverns, structures that defied physics, and beings like my visitor moving among them. The images shifted rapidly, showing me glimpses of what seemed like history. The formation of the earth, the rise and fall of surface civilizations, all observed from below. Blood dripped from my nose, and a sharp pain lanced through my head. The images were too much, too alien for my mind to process. The pit dweller moved closer, its form continuously restructuring. It reached toward my pack, and I felt rather than saw it, examining the crushed hard hat I'd found. A series of vibrations shook the chamber, stalactites responding with tones that almost formed words. Collection. From the ground around us, the cave floor itself began to rise, forming human-shaped figures made of perfectly arranged minerals. They moved jerkily like puppets before freezing in place and hardening into statues. One of them looked disturbingly like Miguel Rodriguez. The entity was showing me what it could do, what it had done. Suddenly, the passage behind me sealed itself, stone flowing like molasses to block my exit. The walls of the chamber began to shift and change, rearranging into a complex labyrinth. The pit dweller was testing me, or playing with me. My breathing quickened as claustrophobia threatened to overwhelm me. The cave was changing faster now, passages opening and closing randomly. I was trapped in a maze that rewrote itself moment by moment. The entity followed at a distance, observing my reactions. When I hesitated at a junction, the wrong passage would seal itself off, nudging me in a specific direction. It was herding me deeper. After what seemed like hours of this twisted game, I found myself in a cathedral-like chamber, bigger than anything I'd seen before. Massive columns stretched to a ceiling lost in darkness. At the center was a perfect circle of water, still as glass and black as ink. The pit dweller moved to the edge of the pool and gestured for me to look. When I did, I saw not my reflection but the night sky, stars and galaxies spinning in impossible clarity. Then the image shifted to show my office at the ranger station, my apartment, places I frequented on the surface. The entity had been watching me for a long time. The stalactites sang again, forming words in my mind. Youdifferent. Different from what? I asked. OtherScollected. I understood then. I wasn't the first person it had lured down here, but something about me had caught its attention. Was it my research, my mapping, the fact that I kept coming? Back despite the signs, the entity's form changed again, becoming more complex, developing features that mimicked my own. It was learning from me, adapting. In a sudden, fluid movement, it reached out and touched my forehead. Pain exploded behind my eyes as information flooded my brain. Visions of a hollow earth, a world within our world, civilizations rising and falling in cycles spanning millions of years. I saw beings like the pit dweller evolving alongside, Earth's geology becoming one with the stone itself, watching surface dwellers with detached curiosity. I saw what happened to the collected, preserved in mineral-rich solutions, studied, sometimes replicated, specimens in a vast underground museum. When the vision ended, I collapsed to my knees, gasping. The pit dweller stood over me, waiting for my reaction. "Why show me this?" I managed to ask. The answer resonated through the chamber. Y-O-U-S-E-E-K. It was right. All my life, especially since losing Linda and Emily, I'd been seeking answers, pushing into dangerous places, mapping the unknown. And here was the ultimate unknown, a non-human intelligence that predated mankind. The ground began to tremble again, but this time I recognized it wasn't footsteps or an earthquake. It was laughter, the entire cave system vibrating with amusement at the tiny human who thought he could understand its secrets. As darkness closed in around me, I realized the truth. I wasn't exploring the cave. The cave was exploring me. A face should be, it had only a smooth blank surface that occasionally rippled to form crude features. An eye here, the suggestion of a mouth there. I'd found the pit dweller, or more accurately, it had found me. I stood frozen, unable to run, my years of research suddenly made flesh, or stone, before me. My hand crept toward the revolver at my hip, but I knew instinctively it would be useless. The entity moved, with impossible fluidity, stopping about 10 feet away. It raised what might have been an arm, pointing to the wall beside me. Before my eyes, the solid rock flowed like water, forming shapes and symbols, complex mathematical equations that hurt my brain to look at directly. "What are you trying to tell me?" I whispered. In response, the cave wall opposite me became reflective, like a mirror made of polished obsidian. In it, I saw not my reflection, but images of a vast underground civilization. Cities carved into enormous caverns, structures that defied physics, and beings like my visitor moving among them. The images shifted rapidly, showing me glimpses of what seemed like history. The formation of the earth, the rise and fall of surface civilizations, all observed from below. Blood dripped from my nose, and a sharp pain lanced through my head. The images were too much, too alien for my mind to process. The pit dweller moved closer, its form continuously restructuring. It reached toward my pack, and I felt rather than saw it examining the crushed hard hat I'd found. A series of vibrations shook the chamber, stalactites responding with tones that almost formed words. C-O-L-L-E-C-T-I-O-N. From the ground around us, the cave floor itself began to rise, forming human-shaped figures made of perfectly arranged minerals. They moved jerkily like puppets before freezing in place and hardening into statues. One of them looked disturbingly like Miguel Rodriguez. The entity was showing me what it could do, what it had done. Suddenly, the passage behind me sealed itself, stone flowing like molasses to block my exit. The walls of the chamber began to shift and change, rearranging into a complex labyrinth. The pit dweller was testing me, or playing with me. My breathing quickened as claustrophobia threatened to overwhelm me. The cave was changing faster now, passages opening and closing randomly. I was trapped in a maze that rewrote itself moment by moment. The entity followed at a distance, observing my reactions. When I hesitated at a junction, the wrong passage would seal itself off, nudging me in a specific direction. It was herding me deeper. After what seemed like hours of this twisted game, I found myself in a cathedral-like chamber bigger than anything I'd seen before. Massive columns stretched to a ceiling, lost in darkness. At the center was a perfect circle of water, still as glass and black as ink. The pit dweller moved to the edge of the pool and gestured for me to look. When I did, I saw not my reflection, but the night sky, stars and galaxies spinning in impossible clarity. Then the image shifted to show my office at the ranger station, my apartment, places I frequented on the surface. The entity had been watching me for a long time. The stalactites sang again, forming words in my mind. Y-O-U-D-I-F-F-E-R-E-N-T. Different from what? I asked. O-T-H-E-R-S-C-O-L-L-E-C-T-E-D. I understood then. I wasn't the first person it had lured down here, but something about me had caught its attention. Was it my research? My mapping? The fact that I kept coming back despite the signs? The entity's form changed again, becoming more complex, developing features that mimicked my own. It was learning from me, adapting. In a sudden fluid movement, it reached out and touched my forehead. Pain exploded behind my eyes as information flooded my brain. Visions of a hollow earth, a world within our world, civilizations rising and falling in cycles spanning millions of years. I saw beings like the pit dweller evolving alongside, Earth's geology becoming one with the stone itself, watching surface dwellers with detached curiosity. I saw what happened to the collected, preserved in mineral-rich solutions, studied, sometimes replicated. Specimens in a vast underground museum. When the vision ended, I collapsed to my knees, gasping. The pit dweller stood over me, waiting for my reaction. "Why show me this?" I managed to ask. The answer resonated through the chamber. Y-O-U-S-E-E-K. It was right. All my life, especially since losing Linda and Emily, I'd been seeking answers, pushing into dangerous places, mapping the unknown. And here was the ultimate unknown, a non-human intelligence that predated mankind. The ground began to tremble again, but this time I recognized it wasn't footsteps or an earthquake. It was laughter, the entire cave system vibrating with amusement at the tiny human who thought he could understand its secrets. As darkness closed in around me, I realized the truth. I wasn't exploring the cave. The cave was exploring me. The rocks came down without warning. 1 second I was backing away from the pit dweller, the next. The ceiling crashed down between us in a pile of stone. I jumped for cover, scraping my shoulder raw against the wall as tons of rock smashed where I'd been standing. When the dust cleared, I found myself trapped in a small pocket of the room. My headlight flickered weakly, batteries dying at the worst. Time. The beam caught glints of something in the newly exposed wall, dozens of human shapes frozen in clear crystal, perfectly preserved. I recognized Miguel Rodriguez right away. Next to him was a woman in old-fashioned clothes, and beside her a man in what looked like 1930s gear. Dr. Spencer, I realized with a shock. Dozens more stretched into the darkness, a collection spanning decades, maybe centuries. Panic grabbed at my throat as the walls seemed to press inward. I fumbled for the pills in my pocket, then stopped. I needed the fear now, needed my mind sharp. The space was getting smaller. Not just my imagination, the walls were actually closing in, the stone flowing inward like slow-motion quicksand. The pit dweller wasn't giving up its new specimen so easily. That's when I remembered something from my mining days. Certain types of rock respond to sound. Specific tones can make crystal structures vibrate and eventually break. It was a long shot, but my only chance. I pulled out my tape recorder and turned the playback volume as high as it would go. The strange whispers I'd captured earlier filled the space, but nothing happened. Then I rewound to my own voice. The steady, even tones of my note-taking, the effect was immediate. The stone around me trembled, then paused in its advance. The pit dweller's control was thrown off by the sound of another mind, my voice, my words, my very human patterns of speech. I needed more. I pulled out my emergency flare and struck it against the wall. The bright chemical light and sharp. Crack caused another tremor. Then I remembered the old mining tricks for finding weak spots in tunnel supports, rhythmic tapping that shows hollow spaces. I began to knock on the walls in a steady pattern. Knock, 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 pause, knock, 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 pause. My knuckles bled, but I kept going. The stone shuddered in response, confused by this organized resistance. A crack appeared along one wall, widening as I continued my tapping. Beyond it, I glimpsed another tunnel, one that hadn't been there before. The cave system itself was responding to me now, creating an escape route. Just as hope sparked, tendrils of stone shot from the floor, wrapping around my ankles. Where they touched, burning pains spread as my skin began to crystallize, turning into the same living stone as the entity. I had one last, desperate move. My emergency pack contained an oxygen tank for underwater passages. If mining had taught me anything, it was that compressed gas is dangerous, and flares plus oxygen equal explosion. Sorry about this, I muttered to whatever park official would eventually investigate the damage. I cracked open the valve on the tank and rolled it toward the crystallizing tendrils. Then I pulled the pin on a second emergency flare. The boom was bigger than I expected, blasting a hole through the weakened wall and throwing me through it in a shower of rock chips and dust. Pain shot through my leg, where the stone had begun to change me. A patch of skin now sparkled with embedded crystals that caught the dying light of my headlamp. Behind me, I heard the musical tones of the hanging rocks change from confusion to anger. The whole tunnel system shook with the pit dweller's fury. I scrambled forward, half crawling through the new passage. It led upward, which gave me hope. After what felt like hours of desperate climbing, I pulled Dr. Spencer's journal from my pack. His final map showed a back way out, one the pit dweller might not control. Following the faded pencil marks, I turned at a fork that felt familiar, though I'd never been there before. The air changed, slightly cooler with the faint smell of desert plants. I was getting close to the surface. The shaking had stopped. Either the thing had given up or was planning something worse. I rounded a final bend and almost cried at the sight of moonlight filtering through a narrow crack ahead. With the last of my strength, I squeezed through the opening and collapsed onto the cool desert ground under a sky full of stars. 6 months later, I stood at the entrance to the lower chambers, watching as park engineers installed the final concrete barrier. Extreme danger of collapse was the official reason given for sealing this section permanently. My report mentioned nothing about moving stones or ancient entities. They'd have taken my badge for that. My leg still aches where the crystallization began. Doctors call it an unusual mineral deposit, but I know better. Sometimes I catch glimpses of perfect patterns forming under my skin, then disappearing when I look directly. At night, I feel vibrations through the floor of my apartment, subtle pulses that form equations in Morse code, messages I'm still trying to understand. The most troubling thing happened last week. The small rocks on my desk, ordinary pebbles collected from around the park, rearranged themselves overnight into a perfect copy of the star chart hanging on my wall. A reminder that something is still watching, still learning. I've asked to transfer to another park, somewhere without caves. My boss thinks it's the fear of tight spaces acting up again. Let him think that. But before I leave, I've hidden copies of my real notes and maps in a safety deposit box in town, with instructions to mail them to certain researchers if I disappear. Someone should know the truth. The pit dweller and I played a game of sorts, and I may have won the first round. But deep below, in the breathing darkness of Carlsbad Caverns, something ancient is already preparing for my return, because it knows what I haven't admitted to myself yet, that despite everything, I'll go back down someday. The hollow earth has shown me its secrets, And once you've seen them, the surface world never feels quite real again. Some games never really end. They just change players. And the stones are always listening. I never believed in monsters until I saw one with my own eyes. My name is Michael Townsend, Park Ranger at Okefenokee National Wildlife Refuge. I've spent 5 years patrolling these waters, but nothing prepared me for what I found that July afternoon. The heat was so thick you could cut it with a knife. I steered my patrol boat slowly through the cypress knees, those weird wooden spikes that poke up from the swamp floor. Sweat rolled down my back, soaking my uniform. The engine hummed quietly. As I made my way toward Billy's Island for my regular check, something felt off today. I couldn't put my finger on it, but after years in the military tracking enemy movements, I've learned to trust that feeling in my gut. The Spanish moss hung like grey beards from the ancient trees, not moving at all in the dead summer air. Normally, this swamp is never quiet. Frogs croaking, birds calling, insects buzzing. But as I got closer to the island, everything went silent. And I mean dead silent. The kind that makes the hair on your neck stand up. That's when I noticed the water. Usually, the Okefenokee is brown, like weak coffee. But looking over the side of my boat, I saw my reflection in water so still it was like glass. Only the reflection wasn't right. There were no trees in it, no sky, just an empty landscape. I didn't recognize. I blinked hard, thinking the heat was getting to me. When I looked again, the water beneath my boat had turned black. Not dark brown, pitch black, even though I knew this part was only about 4 feet deep. What the hell? I muttered, reaching for my water bottle. As I took a swig, I realized something else strange. There were no gators. This part of the swamp usually had at least a dozen sunbathing on logs or swimming around, but not today. I did spot fresh claw marks on some cypress trunks, though, like something had been scratching at them. The fish were acting weird, too. Instead of darting away from my boat like they usually do, they were swimming in perfect squares and triangles under the water. I've never seen fish move like that before, like they were following invisible lines. I checked my GPS to mark the spot, but the screen was going crazy, showing me jumping all over the map even though my boat was barely moving. Great equipment failure in the middle of nowhere. As I neared an old rotting dock on the edge of Billy's Island, something caught my eye. A rusty hunting knife stuck in the wood. I pulled up to take a closer look. The handle was worn and aged, falling apart from years in the weather. But the blade? It was clean and shiny, like someone had just polished it. I pulled the boat onto the muddy bank and spotted animal tracks. They started as normal raccoon prints, but as I followed them, they began to change, getting longer, deeper, turning into something I couldn't identify. In 15 years of tracking, I'd never seen prints morph like that. The sun was still high, but somehow the island seemed darker than it should be. As I stepped further onto land, my hand instinctively moved to the gun on my hip. Something was watching me. I could feel it. That's when my radio crackled to life. "Michael, come back." The voice was barely audible through the static. I had pulled out my radio. "This is Ranger Townsend. Repeat your message over." The reply came through clearer this time. "Michael, come back to the water." I froze. I recognized that voice. It belonged to Ranger Patterson, who had been dead for 3 years. My heart nearly stopped when I heard Patterson's voice. I looked around, half expecting to see his ghost standing among the cypress trees. I touched the dog tags hanging under my shirt, not mine, but belonging to Davis, my teammate who died during our last mission together. I kept them as a reminder of how quickly things can go wrong in the wild. "Get it together, Michael," I whispered to myself. The heat was probably playing tricks on me, or maybe someone was pulling a sick joke with an old recording. I wasn't supposed to be here at Okefenokee. 3 years ago, I had a good job at Yellowstone. That ended after the incident, as my boss called it. I was tracking a poacher at night when I found something else instead. Something that left 3 tourists badly hurt and me with a report full of questions no one could answer. They transferred me here, to the back end of nowhere, where I couldn't cause trouble. Most people don't know this swamp has secrets. I've been keeping track of them in my journal for years now. Strange animal behaviors, weird lights at night, and the disappearances. Always during full moons or the summer solstice going back to the 1920s. Too many to be just accidents. My grandfather taught me how to track when I was just a kid. He claimed his mother was Cherokee and he knew things about the woods that weren't in any ranger handbook. How to read broken twigs, how to feel the difference between animal fear and animal hunger, how to know when something wasn't right with the land. I reached into my pocket and felt the special bullets there. Old Martha, the local root doctor, gave them to me after I pulled her grandson from quicksand last winter. She'd melted down silver coins and blessed them with words I couldn't understand. Some things ain't natural in those deep waters, Ranger, she had told me, her eyes serious. When you find it, these might help. I thought she was just a superstitious old woman. Now I wasn't so sure. The other rangers think I'm strange. They've stopped volunteering for night patrols with me after Jacobs, Rodriguez, and Smith all asked. And for transfers, they said I attract trouble. Maybe they're right. My hand moved to the scar on my back, a reminder of my first year here. I told everyone it was a bear attack. The doctor who stitched me up had different questions, though. What kind of bear leaves claw marks like this? He'd asked. I didn't have an answer. Lately, I'd been having the same nightmare over and over, being pulled underwater while something watched from below. I'd wake up gasping for air, my sheets soaked with sweat. Last week, I found old maps of Billy's Island in the station archives. They showed it was once almost twice as big. According to notes in the margins, half the island sank into the swamp overnight in 1954. No explanation, just gone. Standing on the shore now, looking at those strange animal tracks changing shape, I wondered if I was finally going to find answers to the questions that had been haunting me for years, or if I was walking into something I wouldn't be able to escape. I checked my watch. 4 hours until sunset. Plenty of time to investigate and get back to my boat. That's what I thought anyway. I was wrong. So very wrong, I decided to head back to my boat. Something about this place felt wrong, and my years of tracking had taught me to listen to that feeling. When I got to the shore, I found my first real problem. The boat engine wouldn't start. I pulled the cord again and again, but nothing happened. I checked the fuel tank, still full. I looked for obvious engine damage, nothing. It just wouldn't work, like something had sucked the life right out of it. Great, I muttered, grabbing my emergency radio. Base, this is Townsend. I'm stranded on Billy's Island. Engine failure. Over. I got nothing but static in return. That's when I noticed the water around my boat. It was moving in perfect circles, like when you drop a pebble in a pond. But these circles were moving against the current, spreading out from my boat in every direction. The sun was still up, but the sky was getting darker by the minute. I checked my watch. Only 2:30 p.m. Sunset shouldn't be for hours. I needed to find a high spot on the island where I might get radio reception. As I walked along the shore, I spotted footprints in the mud. Fresh ones. Human at first, like someone wearing boots. But as I followed them, they changed. The heels stretched out, the toes became longer, more like a dog's paw but much bigger, and they sank deep into the mud like whatever made them was very heavy. My heart started beating faster. I wasn't alone on this island. The radio in my hand suddenly crackled to life. Michael, water, coming. It was Patterson's voice again. The same man whose search party I had joined 3 years ago, the same man whose body we never found. I jumped when my radio spoke again, this time in a voice I recognized as my own. Help me! It's in the water, watching. I nearly dropped. The radio. How was this possible? I hadn't transmitted anything. The temperature around me suddenly dropped. In the middle of Georgia summer, I could see my breath forming clouds in front of my face. A thick fog started rising from the water, hugging the surface like a living blanket. Something white caught my eye, a piece of fabric snagged on a low branch. I moved closer and felt my stomach drop. It was a torn Ranger uniform shirt with a name tag that read Townsend. My name, but not my shirt. I never lost a uniform here. As I stood there trying to make sense of this, I noticed claw marks on the trees nearby. They were nearly 8 feet off the ground, higher than any gator could reach. Inside, some of the deeper scratches was strange. Fur that seemed to change color when I touched it, from gray to greenish black, like oil on water. I pulled out my compass, hoping to at least figure out which direction would take me to the main ranger station across the swamp. The needle spun wildly before stopping, pointing firmly toward the center of the island. I moved in a circle, but the needle stayed fixed on that spot, like something there was pulling it. The sky grew darker still. I checked my watch again, 3:15 p.m. Looking up, I could see the moon already visible, full and bright against the darkening sky. That was impossible. The full moon wasn't supposed to be until tomorrow night. A cold realization washed over me. Night was falling hours earlier than it should. The swamp was growing dark while the sun, now barely visible through the trees, seemed to be racing toward the horizon. That's when I heard it. A splash from the water behind me. Not the normal splash of a jumping fish or diving bird. This was bigger, deliberate. I turned slowly, my hand moving to my gun. The water surface was breaking about 30 feet from shore. Something was coming up, something big. I stood frozen, watching as a dark shape rose from the black water. At first I thought it was a gator. We have some 12-footers in these parts. But what lifted its head from the Okefenokee waters was like nothing I'd ever seen before. And it was looking right at me. The creature rising from the water made my blood run cold. It had a head that looked partly like a wolf and partly like an alligator, long snout full of teeth, but with pointed ears and wild eyes that glowed yellow in the fading light. Its body was long and sleek, with limbs that seemed too stretched, out like someone had pulled them like taffy. I blinked, and for a second it seemed to shimmer and change shape, one moment solid like an animal, the next flowing like dark water. It moved with a grace that didn't make sense for something so large, sliding through the water without making waves. I reached for my gun, but my hands were shaking so bad I fumbled with the holster. The creature, the swamp strider, as I would later name it, watched me with eyes that seemed too aware, too knowing for any normal animal. When I finally got my gun out, the creature sank back under the water. The surface went still for a moment, and I thought maybe it had gone away. Then the water 20 feet to my right broke, and it rose again. It was herding me, I realized, keeping me from going back toward my boat. Every time I tried to move toward the shore where I'd landed, pools of water would suddenly appear in my path, forcing me to step around them, pushing me deeper into the island. "This isn't happening," I whispered, but I knew it was. The swamp strider howled then, a sound I'll never forget as long as I live. Not fully animal, not fully human. When lightning flashed overhead, from where I don't know, as there hadn't been a cloud in the sky minutes earlier, I could see the water rippling in patterns that almost looked like words. I ran. There's no shame in admitting it. 20 years. In parks and military service, and I ran like a scared kid. But something strange happened. The creature split apart into smaller versions of itself, like shadows breaking off. They surrounded me, herding me away from escape routes, always pushing me toward the center of the island. I fired a shot with one of Martha's blessed silver bullets. It hit one of the smaller creatures square in what should have been its chest. The thing screeched in pain, a sound that made my ears ring, but then it simply flowed around the wound like water finding a new path. The bullet had hurt it but didn't stop it. Everywhere the creatures touched the ground, they left behind black goo that sizzled and bubbled. Within seconds, insects would swarm to it, forming unnatural shapes above the puddles, spirals and geometric. Patterns no bug should know how to make. I stumbled into a clearing and froze in shock. There, standing among the trees, was me. Another Michael Townsend, in the same uniform with the same face. But not quite right. His eyes were too dark. His movements jerky. Then another appeared and another. The swamp strider was creating copies of me, trying to confuse me. "Stop this!" I shouted, not even sure if the creature could understand me. "What do you want?" In answer, all the water around the clearing began to rise, forming walls that blocked potential escape routes. It was like the swamp itself was helping. The creature, responding to its will. I noticed something else disturbing. Any weapon I might use, from fallen branches to rocks I picked up, would suddenly become slippery or break apart in my hands. The creature was somehow affecting them, making sure I stayed defenseless. I backed against a large cypress tree, trying to keep all the smaller creatures in my line of sight. They circled slowly, sometimes solid enough to leave tracks, sometimes flowing like living shadows. The main creature, larger than the rest, watched from the edge of the clearing, its yellow eyes never blinking. "You're smart," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "Smarter than any animal has a right to be." The creature tilted its head, almost like it was listening. "What are you?" I asked. In response, it opened its mouth. Instead of a roar or growl, water poured out, dark water that moved against gravity, flowing upward into the air to form a shape, the shape of Billy's Island, but larger than the island I knew, showing the missing portions that had sunk decades ago. It was trying to communicate. The smaller creatures closed in, their bodies seeming to merge and separate at will. I fired another shot, hitting the ground near one of them. The blessed bullet made the earth sizzle, and the creatures backed away from it. That's when I realized they were afraid of something in the bullets. Not the silver itself, but whatever. Blessing Martha had put on them. Thunder crashed overhead as the unnatural storm grew stronger. The wind whipped through the trees, but the water walls around me remained perfectly still, defying nature. The main creature suddenly lunged forward with impossible speed. Before I could react, its elongated limb, not quite an arm, not quite, a tentacle, wrapped around my ankle. It was cold as ice and strong as steel, and then it began to pull me toward the center of the island, toward whatever secret lay hidden in the heart of this haunted swamp. The creature dragged me through the underbrush, my fingers clawing at roots and plants as I tried to slow us down. We were heading to the center of Billy's Island, to a place that didn't show up on any of the modern maps. Soon, I found myself in a clearing I'd never seen before. The ground felt wrong under my feet. Not solid like the rest of the island, but soft and spongy, like it might give way at any moment. All around me, the water was rising, turning the small piece of land where I stood into a shrinking island. "What is this place?" I gasped, trying to find solid ground. The main creature, the swamp strider, circled me in the water. The smaller ones had merged back into it, making it even larger. Its yellow eyes never left me as the water rose inch by inch, threatening to swallow the little dry land I had left. That's when I noticed them, the trees. Old cypress trees formed a circle around this clearing, and in their hollow trunks I could see shapes. Human shapes. I approached the nearest tree, my heart pounding. Inside was a body, or what was left of one, preserved somehow, mummified by the swamp. The man wore old-fashioned clothes, maybe from the 1950s. His face was frozen in an expression of pure terror, his mouth open in a silent scream. There were more bodies in other trees. Some looked decades old, others more recent. With horror, I recognized the uniform on one. It was Patterson, the ranger who had disappeared 3 years ago. Something caught my eye near Patterson's body. A weathered notebook, somehow preserved. From the elements, I grabbed it, flipping through the yellow pages. The notebook was dated 1954. The handwriting was messy, like the person had been scared while writing. Chemical spill. Black water. Something in the water moving called to it, coming out at night. The last page had a crude drawing of the same creature that now watched me from the water. "You've been here since 1954, I said aloud. "Since the chemicals." The creature made a sound. Not quite a growl, more like water rushing through a narrow pipe. It circled closer, and I could see now that it wasn't just one thing. Inside its shadowy body were shapes, human shapes, moving and reaching out like the creature had somehow absorbed them. The water rose higher, now at my knees. The ground beneath me was shrinking fast. The swamp strider lunged, its jaws snapping inches from my face. I fell backward into the water, but managed to scramble back onto the tiny bit of land left. That's when I realized something. The creature hadn't followed me onto land. It stayed in the water, circling. It wasn't hunting me. It was guarding something. "What's under there?" I shouted, pointing at the soft ground beneath my feet. "What are you protecting?" The water churned around me as the creature grew agitated. Lightning flashed overhead, illuminating the clearing. For a brief second, I could see through the ground, like the lightning had turned it transparent. Something massive lay beneath, metal. Drums, dozens of them, with warning symbols barely visible through years of muck. "The chemical dump," I whispered. "That's what sank half the island." In my pocket, I felt the weight of my emergency flares. An idea formed, a desperate one. The creature seemed tied to the still water it could control. What if I could break that control? I remembered from my training that certain swamp plants are highly flammable, especially during dry seasons. Even with all this water around, I could create smoke. And smoke might affect this thing that was partly shadow. Working. Quickly, I gathered handfuls of Spanish moss and dry palmetto leaves, stuff that would burn smoky. Using my lighter, I set them on fire and threw the burning bundles in a circle around me. The effect was immediate. As smoke filled the air, the creature let out that terrible howl again. It seemed more solid now, less able to shift between forms. The smoke was working, making it vulnerable. Thunder crashed directly overhead and rain began to pour down, but strangely it fell everywhere except on my fires. The creature was controlling the rain, trying to keep my fires from affecting it. I knew I had only one chance. At the edge of the clearing, I spotted an old structure half submerged in the water, the remains of a small dam, probably built by loggers decades ago. If I could break it open, create running water. I loaded my gun with my last blessed bullet and aimed carefully at the rotten wood of the dam. The shot had to count. I fired. The bullet struck true, splintering the weak point in the old dam. Water began to pour through the gap, creating a strong current where before there had been only still, black water. The effect on the swamp strider was immediate and terrifying. It let out a shriek that seemed to come from multiple throats at once. As the current grew stronger, the creature's body began to fragment, pieces of it being pulled apart by the flowing water it couldn't control. I didn't wait to see more. I grabbed the old notebook and ran, splashing through the water toward higher ground. Behind me, the creature's howls grew fainter as it was forced to retreat to deeper, still waters away from the current. By some miracle, I found my way back to my boat. The engine started on the first try, as if whatever power had killed it was now gone. I sped away from Billy's Island as fast as the boat would carry me, not looking back until I was miles away. 6 months have passed since that day. I'm still a ranger at Okefenokee, but things are different now. I convinced my superiors that we needed better water management in the refuge. We installed pumps that keep the water flowing in areas that used to be stagnant pools. I told them it was for mosquito control. They believed me. The EPA came in after I showed them the notebook and my report. They found the chemical drums just where I said they would be. The cleanup is still ongoing. On my office wall hangs a map of Billy's Island. The old map showing its original size before half of it sank. Sometimes I take out my notebook and add to my observations, recording everything I can about what happened. During the drought last month, the water levels dropped lower than they had in years. Standing on the observation platform, I looked out across the swamp as the sun set. For just a moment, I saw something move beneath the surface of a distant pool, a shadow flowing against the current, yellow eyes briefly reflecting the fading light. The pumps keep the water moving now. The currents are our protection. But I know the truth that I can never fully share with anyone. It's still out there, waiting in the deep, still waters of the Okefenokee, waiting for the currents to stop, waiting for the water to grow still once more. And sometimes, on quiet nights when the moon is full, I hear my radio crackle with voices that shouldn't be there, reminding me that in the Okefenokee, some shadows don't disappear when light shines on them. They just go deeper. I never believed in monsters until I became one's prey. My name is Jack Thornton, and what I'm about to tell you happened in the summer of 1965, deep in the Chequamegon-Nicolet National Forest of Wisconsin. I've been a park ranger here for 5 years, but nothing in my training or even my time in Vietnam prepared me for what lurks in these woods when the mist rolls in. It started on a Tuesday morning in July. I was doing my usual patrol, enjoying the quiet. The morning light filtered through the tall pines, creating spots of gold on the forest floor. Birds sang their morning songs, and I felt that rare peace that only comes in these quiet moments alone in nature. I stopped at Widow's Peak, my favorite lookout spot. From there I could see miles of untouched wilderness. This place had become my sanctuary after the war. Out here, the screams in my head grew quieter. The faces of my dead friends faded just a little. My radio crackled, breaking the silence. Unusual weather pattern moving in, the voice said through bursts of static. Unseasonably cold fog predicted by afternoon. I frowned. Fog wasn't expected. Until evening, if at all. July isn't fog season in these parts. As I continued down the trail toward Mirror Lake, something caught my eye. A group of deer bolted across my path, running like hell itself was chasing them. But there was nothing behind them. No wolf, no bear, nothing I could see that would spook them like that. Something wasn't right. At the lake, the water was wrong. Mirror Lake usually lives up to its name, clear and still as glass. But today, the surface was churning, like something large had been thrashing beneath it. Dead fish floated belly up near the shore, dozens of them. That's when I noticed the silence. The birds had stopped singing mid-note, not gradually, like when a hawk passes over. This was sudden, complete, the kind of silence that makes your skin prickle and the hair on your neck stand up. I looked down at the muddy shore and froze. There, clear as day, was a footprint. A human footprint, but all wrong, nearly 18 inches long, pressed deep into the mud. The stride length between prints was impossible, over 4 feet apart, and then, halfway across a patch of soft earth, they simply stopped. Not like someone had jumped or changed direction. They just ended, as if whatever made them had vanished into thin air. The temperature dropped so fast I could see my breath cloud in front of me. A strange mist began creeping between the trees, hugging the ground like a living thing. It wasn't natural fog. It moved against the wind, curling around tree trunks like fingers. My compass went crazy, the needle spinning in complete circles. When I tried to radio back to the station, all I got was static with something underneath it. A low, guttural whisper that didn't sound human. That's when I found the campsite. The Coleman stove was still warm. Coffee bubbled in a percolator, now boiled nearly dry. But the tents were shredded, ripped from the inside out. Sleeping bags lay scattered, some dragged several yards from the campsite. A child's stuffed bear sat alone by the fire, one button eye missing. It was the Miller family's site, the ones reported missing 3 days ago. But the coffee was still hot. Whatever happened here had just occurred, and I was standing right in the middle of it. My hand instinctively went to the inside pocket of my jacket where I keep the photograph. It's creased and worn now, but you can still make out the faces of my platoon. All 12 of them, standing in the Vietnamese sun, grinning like we had something to live for. I'm in there too, second from the left. The day after this photo was taken, I went to check our perimeter traps while the others slept. When I returned, they were all dead, every single one. Some nights I still wake up hearing their screams. Those nights I walked the forest until dawn. That's why I became a ranger after my discharge. I needed somewhere quiet, somewhere I could be alone with trees instead of people, somewhere the memories might finally leave me in peace. 5 years. In these woods, and I know every trail, every cave, every creek. At least I thought I did. The locals call me the Ghost Ranger. I've heard the whispers when I go into town for supplies. They say I'm strange, that I keep to myself too much. When I do help lost hikers, they're grateful, but they can tell something's not right with me. I see it in their eyes, that mix of gratitude and fear. It doesn't bother me. Being alone is easier. Chief Ranger Wilson doesn't understand. He's been pushing me to lead tourist groups, to connect with people, as if talking about squirrel habitats to vacationing families would somehow fix what's broken in me. You need to rejoin the human race, Thornton, he told me last week, sliding a folder across his desk. 4 hikers gone missing near Echo Ridge in 3 months. I want you to look into it. I didn't want the assignment, but I knew these woods better than anyone. If people were vanishing, I might be their only chance. My service revolver hangs heavy against my hip. Rangers aren't supposed to carry firearms on regular patrol, but after what I've seen in Vietnam and sometimes in these woods, I don't go anywhere without it. These forests hold things bigger than bears or wolves. Sometimes I feel eyes on me when there's nothing there to see. Last month, an Ojibwe elder stopped me on the road near the northern boundary. His face was weathered, eyes cloudy with cataracts, but he looked right at me like he could see straight through to my soul. Tall one walks between the trees, he said, his voice like dry leaves. It comes with the mist. It takes those who are already lost. I nodded politely and drove on. I don't believe in monsters or spirits, or at least I didn't then. The strange occurrences kept piling up. I started keeping a journal. Weird sounds. After midnight, whole sections of forest where animals never go. The mist that comes even on clear days. Most rangers would report these things, but who would believe me? They already think I'm half crazy. Yesterday shook me, though. I'd locked my cabin door before heading to town for supplies. I always do. But when I returned, it stood wide open, swinging gently in the breeze. On the porch were wet footprints, massive ones, like those I'd find later by the lake. They led straight to my door, then vanished at the forest line. Someone, something, had been in my home. But nothing was taken. Instead, something was left behind. A single pine branch on my pillow, twisted into an impossible knot. I told myself it was kids playing pranks. I told myself a lot of things, but deep down, I knew. Something was watching me, and now, standing. In this abandoned campsite with the mist closing in, I realized it had been watching for a very long time. The campsite gave me the creeps, so I started searching the surrounding area. That's when I spotted it, a bright blue backpack hanging from a branch nearly 30 feet up. It was the kind of thing no human could have placed there, not without serious climbing gear. I recognized that backpack. It belonged to the Miller family's oldest boy, Timothy, 10 years old. Loved fishing, according to his mom's missing persons report. No way could I climb that high, so I found a long branch and managed to knock it down after a few tries. When I unzipped it, a child's drawing fluttered out. The crayon picture showed stick figures of what I guessed was the Miller family standing near trees. Behind them stood something else, a tall, thin figure that stretched up past the trees themselves. All around the page, in messy kid handwriting, were the words, "He follows," written over and over. My radio crackled to life, making me jump. Through the static came a child's voice. "Daddy, Daddy, help me!" I grabbed the radio. "This is Ranger Thornton. Who's speaking? Where are you?" "Daddy, I'm scared." "It's dark." The voice was small, trembling. It sounded like a kid Timothy's age. "Timothy, is that you? Can you tell me where you are?" The voice changed mid-sentence, warping into a deep, wet growl that made my stomach turn. Then nothing but static. I switched off the radio with shaking hands. The mist was getting thicker now, swirling around my ankles like water. As I continued along the trail, I stopped dead in my tracks. There was a tree unlike any I'd ever seen before. Its bark was embedded with hundreds of tiny animal bones, squirrel skulls, bird feet, mouse ribs, arranged in a spiral pattern that couldn't be natural. Like some kind of sick artwork. I couldn't see more than 10 feet ahead now. The mist moved strangely, not like normal fog. It seemed to reach out with finger-like tendrils, retreating when I moved toward it, advancing when I stood still. It was almost like it was playing with me. My flashlight began to flicker. I'd put in fresh batteries that morning, but now the beam weakened, surged, then weakened again. With each flicker, the shadows between the trees seemed to move. I needed to get back to the ranger station. This wasn't right. On my way, I passed the emergency call box we'd installed last year for hikers in trouble. The receiver was hanging, off the hook, swinging slightly. From it came the automated voice, "If you'd like to make a call, please hang up and try again." "If you'd like to make a call..." I didn't touch it, just kept walking. The cold was getting to me now. It had been nearly 80 degrees that morning, but my breath came out in thick clouds. July in Wisconsin doesn't get this cold, not even at night. And the silence, God! The silence was the worst part. No birds, no insects, no rustling leaves. Even my footsteps made no sound, like the forest was swallowing every noise. I rounded a bend and nearly tripped over it. A dead deer, its body twisted in a way that wasn't natural. Its legs bent at impossible angles, spine curved backward. The chest cavity was empty, organs removed with what looked like surgical precision. No blood anywhere, no animal did this. My radio hissed again. Jack, do you copy? This is search and rescue, we've got your location. Stay put." I froze. I hadn't called for backup. "Who is this?" "Over." "It's Peterson, we're coming to get you." "You're near Echo Ridge, right?" Something was wrong. Peterson didn't work Tuesdays. And his voice sounded off, like someone trying to sound like Peterson but not quite getting it right. "Peterson, what color is the new ranger station door?" A simple question. Everyone knew we'd painted it red last month. A pause. Too long. "Blue." "It's blue, Jack. We're almost to you. Just stay where you are." My blood turned to ice. I clicked off the radio and started running. Whatever was in these woods, it knew my name, it knew where I was. And worst of all, it knew the voices of people I trusted. It was hunting me. I ran until my lungs burned, then slowed to catch my breath. The mist parted for just a moment, and that's when I saw it for the first time. Between two distant pines stood a figure. It was tall, impossibly tall, at least 9 feet, and thin as a sapling. Its arms hung down past where its knees should be. Its skin wasn't skin at all, but something like bark or rotting wood, rough and peeling. Where its face should have been, there was just a darker shadow within the mist. I blinked and it was gone. Then, 20 yards to my right, it was there again. It hadn't walked or run. It had simply disappeared and reappeared. No human moves like that. "Help us, please." The voice came from behind me, Mrs. Miller's voice, exactly as I remembered from when she'd filed the missing persons report. I spun around. Nothing there. "Jack, we're over here." This time it was Mr. Miller, calling from somewhere to my left. "Please, find me, mister. I'm scared of the dark." Timothy's voice from yet another direction. I drew my revolver, turning in a slow circle. The voices were coming from everywhere at once, like the forest itself was speaking. "Show yourself," I shouted. Only the echo answered, bouncing back smaller and smaller until it faded away. I picked a direction and started walking, determined to find my way back to a trail I recognized. But after 20 minutes, I emerged into a familiar clearing. The same one I'd just left. Somehow, walking in a straight line had brought me right back where I started. That's when I noticed the arrangement on the ground. Small stones and twigs, set in a pattern I'd never seen before. And beside it, glinting in what little light filtered through the mist, was a ranger badge. I picked it up, turning it over in my hand. The name read, Evans. I remembered Evans. He'd gone missing in '58, long before I came here. They never found a trace of him. The mist was getting thicker, more active. When I stood still, tendrils of it would reach toward me, pulling back only when I moved suddenly. It was like being surrounded by curious fingers, testing me. I fired, a warning shot into the air. The sound was swallowed completely. No echo, no birds startled into flight. Nothing. Later, I would find that bullet embedded in a tree trunk over a mile away, somehow curved through the forest. The creature appeared, again closer this time. I could see it more clearly now. It had no eyes that I could make out, but I knew it was watching me. The longer I looked at it, the more my heart raced with a fear deeper than anything I'd felt in the war. And as my fear grew, the creature seemed to become more solid, more real, as if my terror was feeding it. I tried another path, but found my way blocked by a massive fallen tree that hadn't been there minutes before. Every direction I tried, something steered me back toward the center of the mist. The thing was herding me. That's when I realized it wasn't alone. Smaller shapes moved in the mist around me, hunched, quick things that scuttled between trees. They carried a scent of wet earth and decay. Little gatherers, I would learn later, the walker's children. One thing became clear. I wasn't the hunter here. I was the prey, and I was being led exactly where it wanted me to go. The mist guided me, deeper into the forest until I found myself at Echo Ridge. It wasn't by accident. I'd been herded here, to this exact spot. I tried to leave, but every path away from the ridge suddenly ended in steep drops that weren't on any map. Ravines appeared out of nowhere, cutting off escape routes that I'd hiked 100 times before. The forest had changed, or something had changed it. In a small clearing at the center of the ridge, I found them. The Miller family, all 4 of them. They were arranged in a perfect circle, facing outward, like they were standing guard. But they weren't standing, and they weren't alive. Their skin was pulled tight over their bones, dry like leather left in the sun. Their eyes were open but sunken in, jaws frozen in silent screams. They looked like they'd been dead for years, mummified by time, but that was impossible. They'd only been missing for 3 days. Their coffee had still been warm. At the campsite, I heard a rustle behind me and turned quickly. The mist was gathering, thickening into something solid. The forest walker, that's what I call it now, took form before me. Not just a tall, thin figure anymore. This was its true shape. It was a twisted mass of branches and roots, woven together into a vaguely human shape. Moss and rotting leaves clung to it, dripping with moisture, but worse were the faces, human faces partially absorbed into its bark-like skin. Some I recognized. Hikers reported missing over the years, a fellow ranger who disappeared last fall. Their mouths moved, whispering warnings I couldn't quite hear. I raised my gun, but knew bullets wouldn't stop this thing. It wasn't alive, not in any way I understood. Then I remembered my training. In Vietnam, when surrounded, we'd sometimes use controlled burns to clear an escape path. I still had my emergency flares. I struck one against a rock and tossed it into a patch of dry undergrowth. The fire caught quickly, forming a barrier between me and the creature. The walker let out a sound I'll never forget. Not a scream, but a howl that cracked tree trunks and sent birds flying from miles away. The mist retreated from the flames. I was backing away when I heard the snap. I looked up just in time to see a massive pine falling toward me. I dove, but not fast enough. The trunk caught my right leg, pinning me to the ground. The pain was blinding. I could feel my bones crushing. Blood soaked through my pants, and I knew if I didn't stop the bleeding, I'd die there. The fire was spreading now, beyond my control. Smoke filled the air as I dragged myself free, inch by agonizing inch. My leg was useless, mangled beyond saving. Using my belt as a tourniquet, I tightened it around my thigh, nearly passing out from the pain. I needed to cauterize the wound. Using the last of my strength, I heated my hunting knife in the flames and did what needed to be done. I screamed until my throat was raw. Using a broken branch as a crude crutch, I dragged myself toward what I hoped was the way out. The walker circled the fire, those smaller creatures darting around it. They were afraid of the flames, but they weren't giving up. That's when I noticed something gleaming on the ground. A silver locket, probably dropped by a hiker long ago. When I picked it up and opened it, I found a faded photo of a young couple with a baby. As the walker moved closer, drawn by my fear and pain, the locket in my hand seemed to repel it. It recoiled, branch-like fingers curling away. I had found its weakness by pure chance. It couldn't stand human connection. Real love, preserved in silver, the exact opposite of the emptiness it created. The smaller creatures rushed me first. I swung my flaming branch, driving them back toward the main fire. Each one that caught flame let out a high-pitched wail, and with each one, the forest walker seemed to grow weaker, as if they were connected. To it, dawn was breaking now, pale light filtering through the trees and smoke. As the sky lightened, the walker retreated deeper into the remaining mist. It wasn't defeated. I could still feel its hatred, but it was withdrawing, waiting for darkness to return. I dragged myself toward the ranger station, following the rising sun. It took me hours, leaving a trail of blood behind me. When they found me, I was barely conscious, still clutching the silver locket. They didn't believe me, of course. Said I'd been attacked by a bear, hallucinated the rest due to blood loss and trauma. They amputated what was left of my leg at the hospital in Ashland. Chief Wilson came to visit me, his face grave. 4 more bodies found, he said quietly. The Miller family, medical examiner can't explain it. Says they look like they've been dead for years. I told him everything. He listened without interrupting, then sighed. Get some rest, Jack, was all he said. That was a year ago now. I still work as a ranger, believe it or not. Desk job, mostly. Training the new recruits. I make sure every one of them carries something silver. Tell them which areas to avoid when the mist rolls in. They humor me the way you humor a war veteran with strange ideas. But I see the doubt in their eyes. The forest walker is still out there. On foggy days, I hear whispers calling my name from the trees. The smaller creatures scratch at my cabin windows on moonless nights. And every few months, hikers go missing. Near Echo Ridge, I keep the silver locket with me always. Some nights it grows warm in my pocket, warning me that something is watching from the tree line. The mist comes more frequently now and spreads further each time. Whatever the walker is, it remembers me. It's patient, and it's angry. I know one day the mist will come for me again, and next time I might not escape. So if you're ever hiking in the northern woods of Wisconsin and the birds suddenly go silent, if the mist rolls in when no fog was forecast, if you hear voices calling to you from between the trees, don't follow, don't investigate. Run. Run while you still can. Because in those quiet forests, something ancient walks between the trees. It watches, it waits, and it takes those who are already lost. Sometimes, late at night, I think I hear Timothy Miller's voice outside my window. "Mister," he whispers, "I'm still scared of the dark. I am too, Timothy. God help me, I am too." Epilogue: The return of the mist. 6 months after I told my story, something changed in the forest. It started with the weather. The local TV station couldn't explain why fog appeared almost every night, even when the air was dry. Scientists came from the university to study it. They left quickly, their equipment broken, their data corrupted. I felt it coming. My phantom leg, the one I lost, would ache before each mist rolled in, like my body remembered what took it from me. Chief Wilson finally started to believe me after what happened to the Anderson brothers. They were experienced hunters who'd been coming to these woods for 20 years. They disappeared on a clear day in October. Search parties found only their rifle casings in a perfect circle. Inside the circle was a ranger badge. The name read Thornton. It wasn't mine. Mine was locked in my desk drawer. This was a message. Wilson came to my cabin that night, his face gray and tired. "Tell me again," he said. "Everything you saw, I did." This time, he took notes. "What does it want?" he asked when I finished. "Territory," I said. "Food. But mostly I think it wants not to be alone." The forest walker had been expanding its reach. The mist now covered 3 times the area it did during my encounter. Hikers reported strange sounds and voices up to 5 miles beyond Echo Ridge. Park authorities closed sections of the trail, blaming unsafe conditions. I started a log, tracking disappearances. Not just hikers now, but locals too. A gas station attendant who worked the night shift. A teenager walking home after dark. A drunk who passed out near the forest edge. They all vanished on misty nights. I visited the Ojibwe elder who had warned me years ago. His small house sat at the edge of the reservation, backed by deep woods. He didn't seem surprised to see me. "You carry its mark now," he said, pointing to my missing leg. "It knows your scent." "How do I stop it?" I asked. He shook his head. "The tall one is old, older than the trees, older than my people's stories. It sleeps for many years, then hungers again." "The silver hurts it," I said. "Not hurts. Reminds," he corrected. "Reminds it of what it lost, what it can never have again." He gave me a small pouch filled with herbs and silver shavings, told me to spread it in a circle around my home. I did. That night, the scratching at my window stopped for the first time in months, but I knew it wasn't over. The walker was learning, adapting. The younger rangers reported strange trees growing where none had been before, trees with bark that seemed to shift position when you weren't looking directly at them. I began teaching the new recruits what to watch for. The sudden silence, the cold spots, the animal bones arranged in patterns. Most thought I was crazy, but a few listened. Those few are still alive. Last week, they found Timothy Miller's backpack again, this time hanging from a tree, right outside the ranger station. Inside was a new drawing, stick figures of rangers, and behind them a tall, thin shape with many arms. At the bottom, in a child's handwriting, "Coming soon." The mist is thicker tonight than I've ever seen it. It presses against my windows, like hands trying to get in. My silver keeps it at bay, but I know that won't work forever. I'm leaving this account so people will know what happened. So maybe someone will find a way to stop it. If you're reading this and I'm gone, know this. The forest walker isn't just killing anymore. It's recruiting. Those smaller creatures I saw, I think they were once human, changed, transformed. I hear their voices sometimes. Rangers and hikers I used to know, calling my name from the trees, asking me to join them. The fog is seeping under my door now, despite the silver barrier. My phantom leg is burning with pain. I think it's finally found a way in. If something wearing my face comes out of these woods, know that it isn't me. The real Jack Thornton died trying to warn you. Stay out of the mist, stay away from the trees, and if the birds suddenly go silent around you, run. Don't look back, just run.